speaker. Our closing speaker is John Miranda. He's a writer, he's a public forum presenter at Amerigo Enterprise. He's, for me, a history expert, American history expert, and we're going to turn it over to him.
Hi, everyone. Really exciting topic. We had good conversation in our room. We had one king among all the queens in our room. And our focus really was talking together first and encouraging each other that with this new administration that we have already seen dramatic change in terms of a new cabinet that is so diversified and so powerful, with women who knew what they were doing before when they held positions, and women who are recognized as being problem solvers for this very challenging time that we have. One speaker expressed concern just because of a syndrome that we all deal with. We sometimes tend to place loyalty above what we think or what we know we should do. And so in some cases where I can say it can happen to a man too, but anyone appointed to a position sometimes wrestles with the loyalty of who appointed them to the position versus taking a stand for what they know is right if it's a difference of opinion. But I think that is just something that we need to keep looking at. Gender equality is not a new issue. We had this tremendous wage gap before the pandemic hit, and now it's a gauntlet. And so what's really important is we agree with the opening speaker that just the way affirmative action was used to ensure that there was a level playing field, that for every 5 men who were interviewed for a job, 5 women were also interviewed for a job, makes sense. And it may seem extreme, but if we reflect on the fact that 2.2 million women have left the workforce since COVID-19 hit, some voluntarily because they cannot handle the pressure of being their educator at home with their children, filling in the gaps for virtual learning, caregiver for elderly parents, some of whom have underlying conditions, and doing a job that now may demand so much more of them because a lot of women fall into the categories of frontline work. Frontline workers are not only in the grocery store, they are retailers, they are nurses, they are teachers, they are airline stewardesses. They are out there because their jobs or their products are required so that the economy and people can continue to survive. And so what do you do for people who are doing extraordinary work at extraordinary risk or who have taken on an extraordinary burden? You make sure that they have an opportunity and are able to be included in terms of go forward jobs. When we emerge from this pandemic, we talked about the fact that some of these jobs are really going to be focused on new careers that are emerging, a lot of them in technology, a lot of them just arising out of the way we will have to operate going forward. And we need to ensure that women understand that they too should be considered for these positions. So some of that is training and development and inclusion in terms of extending the opportunity, upskilling now, having those conversations with each other about upskilling to be able to look at opportunities as they emerge. It definitely is important that we look at the barriers. And I did share that I was in a workshop this week led by Ibram Kendi. And his focus and his talk and his area of study is how to be anti racist. Because a lot of the policies that we follow in corporate America or even our political realm have some underlying biases that end up harming people. And so awareness is our key, right? We say knowledge is power. Awareness is even better. You don't go down that rabbit hole. And so we have to look at gender equality and the gap and the broken rung in a completely different way. There is a new sense of urgency with regard to helping women emerge from this pandemic, and it can't wait until we have emerged. There needs to be a strategy now for what will happen when we get back to what is normal or what the new normal is. We definitely see that sexual harassment had been something that had been touted and made a priority in many organizations. Well, New York City, I know, has mandatory sexual harassment training. Maybe that needs to be broadened and include the way we accommodate or interact with women for hiring, for onboarding, for all of that. So there's just a strong call to action and a sense of urgency that needs to be put around things. Maybe we need to start with legislation on anti-racist policies, which we kind of see in the administration today. I mean, not the administration, but in the body, the legislative body that is supposed to be working for the people, they seem to have more barriers themselves, which prevents them from truly working for all people. And so maybe all of our legislative leaders should take an anti-racist oath and be held to a different standard. Maybe we don't need to go through the dog and pony of removing them from office when we're outraged, because if they violate the anti-racist policy, they should be immediately removed from their position. Anyway, just food for thought. Thank you again, Pashi, for sharing with us at the beginning. Thank you for all my amazing queens in our breakout room and our King Saul. Thank you so much for allowing us to express ourselves.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Wonderful as always. With that, we're going to shift over to Dr. Clifton next to share.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Natalie, for your presentation. But our group was, we sort of focused on a national need for childcare. And it was quite startling because one of our members had grew up in way post-war Germany, and she grew up in a family where there was mandatory, any woman who had a child could count on 2 years of national child care. That sort of gave her a wonderful bond with her mother. That was one of the reasons she shared. But it has to be such a great relief to not have to be torn away from your child after three months and 6 months sometimes. I had entered an example of some movement of changing. And there was several law firms in Manhattan that have actual child care in the law firm because the top hires in the last 5 years were women, and they didn't want to lose the women brain trust. So that was coming from a privileged position, but there was a certain change of consciousness. And then the other members of the group really shared their experiences of an evolving change of consciousness. When they all started as mothers, there was no question that the woman's job was in the home, and their being in the home would trump any professional career. They would have to be at home, and they never really kind of questioned it. And as they evolved as mothers, caretakers, and professionals, they started to say, well, there's something wrong with this. You know, we need more. We are more than just a mother. We're more than just a wife. We want more. And there was like a kind of they shared this shift in consciousness, particularly in relation to our member who grew up in a more enlightened social welfare state. Um, and underlying this all was the general sense that um, as conscious, you know, the under principles of consciousness changes, and there's a great expectation that, you know, this is what we need, this is what we want. You know, it starts to evolve. You know, it's sort of like this belief of consciousness can create movements and understandings that will bring about a policy that will create this, and thus, you know, putting. And then it was also putting, you know, one of the great products of any heartfelt country is the welfare of a child, and we should be geared towards growing them um, in all ways. Seeing the difference from Germany to our uh, our present situation, seeing the change of consciousness, seeing the change of consciousness from when my grandmother was a girl as a suffragette working in a sewing factory and organizing women then, you know, for like not having to work 14 hours a day. There is some shift, but it has a great deal of power. So I was really seeing, you know, and this can be applied to every policy that Hachi, you know, spoke about in an opening talk. So I think it was um, shocking and enlightening for all of us to see that the power is there, and the power of becoming more conscious, and the power of seeing what you expect. And if you organize, you have a much better chance of getting it. So I enjoyed the experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Clifton. We'll move to Jerome.
Yes, hi. Sorry, I had a little cough in the middle of Dr. Clifton discussion. So I had a very nice group with very strong energy and many ideas, many opinions, and many pointers to actually policies. In fact, our discussion went directly into policies and how we should approach those. So the first one that came up was the Equal Right Amendment, or ERA. So one mentioned that, of course, that the ERA came to a point where it was ratified by all the states needed in order to pass and move forward. But at the end, it was somewhat pushed back because, you know, feminist group just decided to make a big lobby movement to actually prevent it from moving forward, and it was supposed to be added as an amendment. And in fact, at the very last moment, 5 states voted to revoke their ratification, and those states were Idaho, Kentucky, Nebraska, Tennessee, and South Dakota. And the point was that perhaps with a progressive agenda that we are seeing now, it may be time to revisit this and just realize that there was a commitment before a long time ago now to actually move forward with this equal right for all Americans, because of course it's not exactly into law. And this overlaps very well with what Prachi told us also about this affirmative action for women. But if it was, of course, as an ERA, it would be very powerful. The second policy that came up is the reproductive right for women. I mean, this has to be a core and centerpiece of all policies moving forward. Because of course, without the protection of a woman in that regard, there will be no equality. As we heard, yes, you cannot fire a woman for this and that, but there are also those other reasons. And I think that is really important to basically to really you know, promote those kind of ideas where things are really protected. And in fact, there was also a point that there was a promise from Biden to codify Roe versus Wade. into law in a way that it cannot also be contested as much in court after court and after court. And perhaps it would be a time to also visit that. People also brought a Hyde Amendment, but in a different context. The Hyde Amendment came, while essentially Roe versus Wade is constantly challenged, or the ERA is being pushed back, probably by the same conservative. Here is a legislation essentially bearing the use of federal fund to pay for abortion, but abortion in many cases has to be part of an healthcare program and part of a protection also of women, but it's also part of a program to achieve healthcare parity. So yet another policy that was discussed as very important to push forward. Then we discussed about the disparity in everyday life. And it was interesting because one of our attendants worked actually on, divorce cases and was essentially reporting that women that come out of a marriage and a divorce, they come out worse than what they went in. And in a sense, this disparity of treatment in a divorce case is also reflected by what we can see in society. It was also mentioned, for example, that the Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 1974, which was pushed by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, for people who are not accustomed to it, it essentially says that, it prohibits discrimination on a basis of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, and so on any credit transaction. It essentially meant before that amendment that women needed authorization from their husband in order to get a credit card or to get a loan or to get anything. So it's actually rather recent where, in fact, the economic benefit or equality of women came to to the forefront, and this also
is it working now?
Oh,
so continuing on what I'm saying.
Okay, I'll hang up.
I see that the technical problems are being resolved. We had also a person saying that she was very fortunate to be working at IBM, and personally she didn't feel necessarily this disparity because she was welcomed there, part of a very energetic team, making things happen. Then went to business and so on. And suddenly when she said that, we started to realize that indeed in a tech world, if you all remember a long time ago, there was Ada Lovelace. I mean, the very first computer programmer and computer scientist was a woman. And that made possible essentially the programming of those big machines. And, women were actually leader in building the early foundation of modern programming, of essentially also maths. I mean, advanced maths, decoding, and all of that were all done by women. And today, we are communicating through the internet thanks to those women pioneers. So what happened exactly? Because nowadays, when we look at the tech world, is totally male dominated. And the point was that it's time perhaps to also readdress that, and perhaps by education, attracting again the woman into those jobs. And we finish on a positive note by saying that while the tech world has changed, we all recognize that there is a need for a balance, because in fact, breakthrough, such as the breakthrough that we saw through the computer revolution, is done, in fact, historically, only by teams that are balanced. And balanced is many points of views. And many points of views are the point of view of men, the point of view of women, equally in equal balance. In order to solve a tough problem, we need diversity all the way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jerome. Apologies for accidentally interrupting you.
No
I'm trying to work with that. Okay, we are now going to finally turn over to John Miranda. Mr. Miranda, if you could just move your finger from the camera, we can see you. We can
Yes.
definitely hear you.
Okay.
Here we go.
Hi, Mayor. Very good.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an honor for me to speak at your seminar. And I'm going to begin and go quickly through a historical perspective, because we have to put everything in perspective. It's 2021. There's a different perspective today. Our expectations are different. But if we start with Abigail Adams, the first lady to the second president, John Adams, when he was elected, she said to him, "Please remember the ladies when you envision government." She could have fit into today's world very easily. She was way ahead of her time, Abigail was, but she knew her place, because at that time, the perspective was different. But I can understand totally why women today are frustrated, because we have moved to a different perspective and many people just don't get it. So we have to take a look at it. In 1848, the first Women's Rights Convention with Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And that was a movement that started to change perspective. And coincidentally, the women's movement and the abolitionist movement were brother and sister. The women realized that if we can free slaves, maybe we can free ourselves, because they were slaves. But it was based on not skin color, it was based on their gender. And so 68 women and 32 men attended this meeting. 32 men. This is in 1848. In 1869, Wyoming passed the first women's suffrage law. And that gave women the right to vote. And in 1890, Wyoming became a state. Now you'll notice Western states seem to have a spirit of freedom, because in Western states, women were very important for survival. And then in May of 1869, Susan Anthony and Elizabeth Stanton found the National Women's Suffrage Association. And years later, in October of 1916, Margaret Sanger opened the first birth control clinic in Brooklyn. It was declared illegal when the Comstock laws forbidding birth control became law. And they were also called the chastity laws. She had to close the fertility clinic twice. It was dangerous even then. And in April of 1917, Jeannette Rankin became an activist and the first woman elected to Congress in the House of Representatives. So you can see women were slowly making progress. And then in May of 1931, Amelia Earhart flew her plane across the Atlantic, following Lindbergh. And then Rosa Parks in 1955 refused to give up her seat. It took a woman to fight for racial justice, but it also had a gender tone to it, that women deserve equality. And then in May of 1960, the Food and Drug Administration approved the first commercially produced birth control pill in the world. This is going to be a game changer. And so now women are liberated from having children before they want them. And it's, of course, a divisive issue, has been for years. And in June of 1963, JFK signs the Equal Pay Act, prohibiting sex-based wage discrimination. So you can see legally progress is being made. And in 1964, LBJ signs the Civil Rights Act, including Title VII, which bans employment discrimination based on race, religion, national origin, or gender. And this is where women sports took off in college. And in 1963, Betty Friedan, author of The Feminine Mystique, founder of NOW, National Organization of Women, Grassroots for Feminism, to open America to women's opportunities. And then we go to Title IX. President Nixon, notice there's Democrats and Republicans. This is bipartisan. President Nixon claimed that no person in the US shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded. And then in 1973, the landmark decision, we're still arguing over this, Roe v. Wade, where the Supreme Court declared by a vote of 7-2 that women's legal right to abortion should be constitutional. We're still fighting over that one. So my point up to this point is this: there's always going to be turmoil. We're going to be having these seminars and discussions for a long time because we live in a democracy. That's number one. And number two, because that's the nature of democracies. And we have to constantly be prepared. Look what's going on in Russia today. They are experiencing similar problems, but in a much grander scale. And then we have in September of 1973, the great tennis player Billie Jean King beats Bobby Riggs in straight sets. How great was that? I watched that live. And she said afterwards, I thought it would set us back 50 years if I lost. So sports has a great way of changing the dynamic here. I think I've lost the camera. That's my finger, probably is in the way. And moving on, a few more. In July of 1981, Sandra Day O'Connor became the first female Supreme Court justice. How great was that? A Republican, Ronald Reagan. And in June of 1983, Sally Ride, the first woman in space, and that was the tragic event that really saddened our country. And in 1984, July, Geraldine Ferraro, remember her? First woman to be nominated for vice president. And in 1993, President Clinton appointed Janet Reno as the first woman attorney general. And in 1997, Madeleine Albright, Clinton appoints as Secretary of State, first woman. And in 1994, Clinton signs the Violence Against Women Act, domestic violence, rape, assault, and stalking. That's kind of strange coming from Clinton with his history. And who do we have today? Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, first woman. And now we also have the first woman vice president of the United States, Kamala Harris. How great is that? So my point is this: put everything in perspective. We have to be patient living in a pluralistic democracy. It's frustrating, I know. It's very frustrating for all of us. But if you have faith in the system, remember what I said the last seminar I attended. It's this: educate your children. They control the future of our country. We must educate our children to live in a democracy. We must teach them the rules of democracy, majority rule. And we must teach them more than anything else, the First Amendment, which has 5 freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of petition. We must teach our children well. And this problem of sexism will slowly fade. The ancient Spartans, if you study their culture, it's interesting that women had achieved a greater status than ever before. So we are smothered by many of our provincial attitudes. We have to unlearn certain things. So let's begin. These seminars, thanks to our leader here, Ms. Saxena, she has done a remarkable job in giving us opportunity to help our country move forward. Thank you very much for the work you do. Peace.
Thank you so much, Mr. Miranda. Thank you very, very much. Thank you for helping us fix our tech challenge. Thank you very much for that journey through history. I think what we're feeling now, if I'm reading the chat messages, we're feeling energized that we can do something. We can influence policy in order to affect women's economic freedom and economic equality. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to all those of you who attended. And let's hope for the best with our new president and our new vice president.
Indeed.
Peace be with you.
Peace be with you as well.